Welcome. You are about to view a recorded talk from the online seminar series Progress and Visions in the Scientific Study of the Mind-Matter Relation, held in 2018. The seminars aim to bring together researchers from around the globe with a background in mathematics or physics who are interested in the scientific study of consciousness and the mind-matter relation. While each seminar session consists of a talk and a discussion, the latter is not recorded and the following video will only contain the talk. We hope you enjoy it. For further information, please visit mind-matter-relation.org.
Thank you very much, Johannes and Robin, for this kind invitation to talk with such a stimulating and distinguished group and about perhaps the most important problem of philosophy ever, the problem of consciousness. The story of the thesis that I'm going to submit to you is as follows. Let's begin with a philosophical question. Suppose that there is a miracle, something which we don't understand how it occurs. It does not fit within our scientific worldview, but what do you know? It's there every moment, every second in our lives. Would its mere persistence make it less miraculous? For the person in the street, sure. Once something occurs and keeps occurring, then it is no longer a miracle. For the scientist and philosopher, this is a miracle nonetheless. The fact that it persists does not mean that it is not strange, not intriguing. And this is a story about our consciousness. We do have subjective experiences, or as we shall term them now in the philosophical parlance, qualia. And nobody has the slightest reason why they are there. They are the most essential part of our lives. Without them, we would be just as dead, even though we would be doing the same thing, and we will talk about that later. But these qualia and this whole world of subjective experience is a miracle. And ever since the ancient Greeks, people were asking themselves, were asking questions about this miracle of consciousness, and philosophers and scientists for the generations wondered about it. And here is the thesis that I'm going to submit. Let me first say something about myself. I'm a physicist, quantum physicist, but I wrote several papers on philosophy, psychology, and so on. And when in the few papers which I wrote about this subject of in philosophy of mind, I came across a theory in philosophy of mind, which for the physicist should be an anathema, and this is interactionist dualism. This is the theory that says that there is something non-physical. Our ancestors called it our soul, something which comes from God, which interferes in our physical world, within our bodies and so on, comes into it and leaves it when we die. And of course, for science, that was something which was actually banished from the picture, because biology, physical sciences and biology in them provided very good explanations for our behavior, for the way that we behave and whatever we do. And then it turns out that human behavior can be explained by physical laws alone. But there is something more important here. Physics, whether classical or modern, is based on conservation laws. This is somehow overlaps with the idea of determinism, and this principle says that there are some quantities in our universe and within every system which are conserved. Energy is conserved, momentum is conserved, which means that nothing is created anew, nothing is disappearing. The amount of energy, motion within any system, and the universe is included, should remain the same. If interactionist dualism is correct, then of course it clashes with this basic principle of physics, and it is no wonder that the most advanced theories in philosophy of mind try to avoid it. They try to find all kinds of ways in order to explain or account for the fact that we have subjective experiences without saying or arguing that these experiences somehow interfere in our behavior, because then that would amount to a clash with conservation laws. Now, several years ago, I came across a proof, which I believe to be very vigorous, in favor of the most undesired theory in philosophy of mind, which is interactionist dualism. And frankly, I hate it. And when I published it, I was hoping for somebody to give a disproof, some refutation of this argument, and none so far came out. There are some objections to my argument in the literature, but none of them, as I will show, is satisfactory. So here I submit again my argument. Just by logics alone and with a very simple proof, I think that I can show that there is something in our behavior which is determined not only by physical laws, but by something extra. I have not the slightest idea what it is, and frankly, I would be happy if I'll see a good falsification of this argument, but this is the challenge to you, distinguished colleagues, and here it goes. So here is the outline of my talk. I'm going to first of all describe the heart of the problem, and I apologize, it would sound like an introductory lecture to students, but I want to state the problem in a way that we all agree about it, and I'll talk about qualia. Then I'll describe the problem that the very existence of qualia brings to science, and attempt to resolve it by arguing that consciousness or qualia, to the extent that they exist and that they differ from the physical world, are not causally effective. They are there, but they do not interfere in what we are doing. We are completely determined by physical laws, and consciousness is just there, but it has no physical effect on it. And I will argue that all these attempts for resolution have failed, which would lead me to what I call the bafflement argument, or as it is known in the philosophical literature, the paradox of phenomenal judgment. And I'll argue that there is one kind of behavior among human beings which actually gives the proof that there is something non-physical interfering in our behavior, or even actually affecting us in everything that we do. Of course, philosophers and scientists would not let me get away only with this, just making this argument. So I'll mention some counter arguments against it, and I'll show that they are invalid. This is what I call the asymmetry proof, and with this I shall conclude. Very well, so let's begin with the essence of the riddle. What's your mind-body problem? What's a mind-body problem with you anyway? And look at this strawberry, and it is red. And let me say something about the red and about sensations in general. And here I'm making a scientific statement. We owe it to Lord Rutherford, who said that in science, the qualitative is only a poor form of the quantitative. That means that everything that you think that is a quality eventually should be translated into the mathematical language of quantities. Let me give you a few examples. We think that red is qualitatively different from blue, but then when we study the mechanisms of vision, we understand that the difference is only quantitative, because the same type of electromagnetic waves, just different wavelengths. Similar for other senses. Sweet, we believe that it is quantitatively different from salty. Not so. These are the same chemical reactions. These are electrons involved in the chemical reactions between the food that we eat and our receptors in our mouth, and just they have different configuration, but the chemical reactions themselves, basically the exchange of electrons, is just the same, and it is a different configuration in space, and configuration is also another thing, another quantity. And the same even when we go to even more complex sensations or emotions like love and hate. These are neurons, and neurons we can understand. They have nowadays very well-known dynamics, and it is just, once again, another configuration of neurons in our brain, which each of them can be perhaps replaced with the other, but it is only the special configuration within our brain which gives us these different feelings. So we would say that actually everything that we think has a special quality to it, actually this quality can be translated into quantity, into numbers, and this is what science is doing. Not so with what we call qualia, and we owe this argument, which is an old one, to Leibniz, who asked the following very, very profound question. Suppose that the human brain is much larger, say as large as a windmill, and we go into the windmill and we see all its machinery. And in this case, this is the machinery of that brain. And suppose that we see that machinery when that person is happy. So we know better than that person what is going on in their brain. But what do we know about happiness? This is something very interesting. We may be even be capable of predicting what this guy is going to do. He's going to smile, he's going to sing, but the very feeling of happiness, even though we see the brain, every detail of the brain while being happy, because we are within it, we don't know anything about the very feeling of happiness unless we are happy ourselves. So there is something about sensations which we don't know, even if we know all the physical details about them. Now, of course, we can mock Leibniz for giving us such a primitive analogy like windmill with all these ridiculous mechanical wheels and so on. We know that the brain is not like that. There is something much more subtle going on there. Neurons, synapses, axons, dendrites, and so on. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. In principle, we can know all the details, and technology enables us to do that better and better. In principle, there could be a future technology which will enable us to know everything about what happens in a certain person's brain whenever that person has a certain sensation or experience. And then, even though we know all the physical details about this sensation, we don't know this experience itself, even if we know better than that person what they are going to do in a minute, because we can predict what they're going to do by looking at their brain and inferring from that what is going to come next. We don't know anything about the sensation. Let's now return to our problem of qualia. Yes. On the left, there is red. On the right, there is blue. And to the extent that none of us is colorblind, we agree about these colors. So here is our nice moderator, Johannes, looking together with me on these two circles. And I think that we agree in English, whether I speak German or any other language. In any language that we can think of, we would agree about these two colors to the extent that we are not colorblind. So we agree about that. Moreover, if we one day have the technology, Johannes and I will be capable of looking into each other's brain and knowing all the details about the sensation of seeing red and seeing blue, and be satisfied that indeed we are undergoing the same brain processes, and it is the same input, same output, everything is fine. Everything is fine except one thing. Nothing in the world, no scientific advance, nothing that we can think about can rule out the possibility that actually Johannes is seeing the red as blue and the blue as red. Just imagine Johannes when he was a baby and mother showed him a strawberry and said, "Look, Johannes, what a nice," I believe the word is rot, strawberry, and look at the sky, how nice blue they are. And little Johannes saw what we see, just inverted. He saw a blue strawberry and red sky, but ever since then he believes that he sees just as we do. So this is the problem of inverted qualia. give it a little thought, and you will understand that no scientific advance, as you can see, even knowing the details, the minutest details of what is going on in a certain person's brain, and this is what Leibniz has shown with his simple example, we cannot rule out this awkward possibility of inverted qualia. Yeah. So let me just mention these two possible examples, and this is something that we cannot rule out. Much worse than that, nothing can prove to us that they have qualia at all. They might be responding just like we do, and even better, to different colors without having these subjective experiences. Think, for example, about the air condition here, the AC system in my room. So there are sensors there which can sense whether the temperature here is cold or hot, and they can very likely they can sense the temperature much better than I do. Still, I would never ascribe to the AC system a sensation of hot and cold as we humans have. We can think, returning to colors, we can think about certain machine being capable of analyzing and making a resolution of all kinds of hues and subhues of red and blue, and even ultraviolet and infrared, and all kinds of colors that we humans cannot, and that machine would be capable of naming them correctly, and still we would not ascribe this machine any qualia. So here is the problem, that everything that a person does, and we think that they have qualia and that it is for the qualia that they are doing what they are doing, actually we have to admit that this cannot be the case, and let me explain this in a minute. Yeah, let's take the simplest example, something from mechanics. Here are billiard balls colliding. So the collisions, if we want to compute their trajectories, all we have to know are their initial velocities, the initial momenta, that is masses and velocities. That is all. Inserting these quantities into the computation, into the equations, we shall be able to compute exactly what they are doing and predict their final positions to any precision that is just a matter of principle, the matter of technology that is available to us. Nothing here, and it's actually trivial. It would be ridiculous to assume that there is some qualia involved, that when one ball hits the other, then it feels pain or some disgust or whatever, and it is being repelled by some sensation. It is not only that there is no room for that, it is not only that there is no need for that in such a calculation, there is no room for that. If you try to put into the computation something which is other than the laws of momentum exchange, then you will get a wrong answer. Your computation would be wrong. So it must be completely clean. The physical world is completely closed. Everything that you put in is what comes out, and momentum here in this case is conserved. You don't want to insert any qualia. Of course, we didn't think about it even, but it will be more complex later. Now let's make it just a bit more complex. I come home and I see one of my plants in a pot, and I see that it is almost dry because it has not been irrigated for a long time. So I give it water, and then I can see the turgor pressure within the leaves, and they straighten, and I say, oh, poor plant, poor flower, it was thirsty, and now it drinks the water. And of course, this is again ridiculous. Everything that happens in that plant, to the best of our knowledge, is determined only by the laws of physics. There are the laws of osmosis. There is more salt within on one side of the membrane, less salt on the other side. So in order to gain equilibrium, the water goes from out into the plant's cells. No need. Once again, I don't think that we today can have, this is my qualia. I don't think that today we have the capability of computing exactly what happens in a plant when it is drinking water, but we assume, and it would be very strange and actually revolutionary if we find out that eventually what happens in that plant is different than the laws of physics. So once again, the world of physics, which now includes even this plant, is completely closed. Energy and momenta are conserved, and these biological processes completely obey the physical law. Any attempt to introduce into them something which is not physical, like the sensation of being thirsty, like the sensation of enjoying the water or feeling relief by the water, would give us an erroneous prediction and computation. And you can guess where I'm getting at. Now think about something more advanced, like animal or human reflexes. The doctor hits with a hammer on our knee and we respond with a reflex. Again, this can be done when a person is unconscious. So we understand that this is a purely biological process, which means that it is a purely physical process. No reason to believe that something other than matter, energy, momentum, and all the other quantities is not conserved here. Once again, the physical world is closed. But then, when we go to something more complex, say Romeo and Juliet, and now we have to admit that there is something really strange. Romeo adores Juliet, Juliet adores Romeo, this time no quotes, which I used earlier when I talked about non-conscious systems. Do we believe that there is something in them which determines their behavior, which affects their behavior, which is not the physical laws? So here are neurons, here are brains, cortices, and so on, two beautiful, very complex human beings. But according to everything that we know, if they are determined by the laws of physics, they would do exactly the same, sing exactly the same songs, kiss exactly the same kisses, embraces, and all. Have they lacked qualia altogether? They would do the same. Have they been obeying the laws of biology and evolution and reproduction? Just the same in beautiful English, same Shakespearean prose. Have they been machines? And actually, this is the problem. Are we more than machines? Each of us says, yes, there is more to me than a machine. I have a qualia, which now I understand you guys, scientists and philosophers, cannot explain, but this is the essence of my life, and here is the problem. So, if, frankly, I don't know where to put the line. If we agree that the motions of the billiard balls are determined only by the laws of physics, and if we accept determinism, and if we accept that nothing in biology, which means also psychology, nothing there involves any violation of a physical law, we don't have to be very ardent reductionists, but only if we say that nothing at the more complex levels violates the principal laws governing the simple science which deals with matter and energy, which is physics, then the awkward position that we are with respect to Romeo and Juliet and with every human being or even every animal, now it is clear why it is so awkward. So once again, I may be repeating myself. Let me go through the evolutionary ladder, through the ladder of complexity, to see whether we were missing something. We call the detergent molecule hydrophobic. At least one side of this molecule is hydrophobic because it is being repelled by water. Of course, it would be ridiculous and wrong, actually absolutely wrong, to say that this molecule has fear, just a sensation of fear of water. It is being repelled by it only by the laws of electricity and chemistry. But then once again, when we think about another phobia, photophobic bacterium, and in this case, this is a bacterium which, if you shed light on it, then it will escape, it will move to another place. We call it photophobic, but it would be, once again, ridiculous. We know that its motion is determined by those flagella, and flagella, which are affected by light, move. The flagella on the other side do not move, and this is why you have the net motion away from light. So it is photophobic only. We call it photophobic, but There is no real phobia, there is no sensation of fear. And you can guess that when we go up the evolutionary scale, here this crab, is it afraid of me, or is it only affected, or can its behavior be explained only by the laws of biology, physiology, physics, and so on? And of course, again, we know what we are expecting. Think about this frightened human. Can I say that that human would be just as frightened, would manifest, would demonstrate just exactly the same behavior? Has there not been the sensation, the quail of fear, of despair? Of course, that would be very silly, cruel to say, and here is the dilemma of objective experience. Why is it there, and does it affect our behavior apart from what we know, what physics tells us, physics and biology and all the sciences which are based on physics? So just a brief review of all the theories in the history of philosophy, all the isms which try to account for this problem. So on the one extreme side, we have physicalism, which says, look, don't believe in any of this stuff. Only matter and energy, our mind is something secondary, just a way of describing very complex phenomena, but there is nothing in the universe other than matter and energy, and all those subjective experiences are just a way to look at it, but this is the whole story. And on the other extreme, we have dualism, which says that mind actually differs from matter. It's not another aspect of it, of our brain and our body and so on, but it is there and it is distinct. And dualism has a version which brings us to what is an anathema for the scientist. Actually, dualism says not only mind is different ontologically from matter, but it interferes with matter. That is, when Julia kisses Romeo, then she kisses Romeo not only because of the physiological processes going on in her body and in her brain, but also because of that basic quail of loving Romeo. Okay, so which means that we are again in a clash with conservation laws. And during the years, people offered all kinds of theories which try to avoid the idea of interactionist dualism. Non-interactionist dualism, that is the general term, says that mind exists, but it does not interact with matter. Let's think about other ways why we behave as we behave, but we will not say that qualia, subjective experience, do anything interfere with the causality of our behavior. And then epiphenomenalism, I believe the German word term is Städtentheorie, which means the shadow theory, and it says the following: imagine some object moving and it has a shadow. So obviously it is the object which affects the shadow, say stone being thrown, a rock being thrown. So there is this rock moving and the shadow which mimics its motion. So it is the motion of the rock which causes the motion of the shadow, never the other way around. So perhaps this is what happens within us. We have a body with governed and brain governed by physical laws, and we have mind, consciousness, qualia, and so on, red, blue, and all these things which are inexplicable by physics. But the effect goes only one way and not the other way around. It is the physical world which gives rise to another world, which is indeed mysterious, indeed distinct, but never the other way around. So that was one way, and some of the greatest minds in philosophy and science opted for this solution. And then we owe to Leibniz the idea of parallelism. There are two worlds equal, one mental, one physical, and by some divine miracle, they are synchronized. So think again about Romeo and Juliet. So Juliet kisses Romeo and Juliet kisses Romeo for two reasons. There is one world in which there are Romeo and Juliet only as physical entities, obeying only physical laws. There is another world in which Romeo and Juliet and their love exists only as qualia, as subjective experiences. Causality dominates each world separately, and just because they are miraculously parallel, we think that they are somehow related, but they are not. This was the idea of no other than the great Leibniz. Identity theory, there is a lot of playing with words, saying that subjective experience and brain processes are just like water and H2O, two ways of addressing the same thing. It is somehow a mixture of all the other theories. Fine. What I'm proposing now is the following argument. You can put all the non-interactionist, oh yes, and there is panpsychism, which I'll say something about it later, to which I myself favor, which says that mind potentially exists within matter, but there is something, of course, very mysterious going on. Now I'm going to, and here comes my my main argument. You can put all these theories, which are non-interactionist theories, they are all theories of dualism, but non-interactionist, in the sense that they do not say that something non-physical interferes with our behavior. And common to all of them is the following assumption. This we can call the consciousness in essentialism postulate. For every action which looks like a consequence of a quale, subjective experience, there is a neuropsychological explanation which ignores qualia altogether. So why did people think about this postulate? And as I say, if you look into, if you go to 20th century's philosophy and 21st century philosophy, you will see that most people adhere to one of these isms under this postulate, which says we would not be as stupid to argue that consciousness does not exist, or it is just only an aspect of the physical world. We understand that there is some mystery about it, that there is no good reason, compelling reason why it exists at all. We acknowledge that, but we argue that it never, the fact that there is this schism between qualia, between consciousness and brain, does not mean that this other thing is interfering with what we are doing, and then we have no clash with physics and conservation laws and so on. And this is, so both philosophy and physics can be satisfied. And I argue that this kind of compromise cannot work. Yes, one more thing, let us just acknowledge what this giant person did and what looks like a gigantic mistake produced by a gigantic mind. Descartes tried to compromise the two views, and I think that everybody agrees that the compromise was miserable. He looked into animals, he looked at animals and said, they are automata. They have no subjective experience. Actually, I recall how appalling it was to read a Jewish philosopher, Shlomo Maimon, who was one of the earliest students of Kant, and he confessed that when he was a young man, he was so strongly influenced by Descartes that when he saw a goat on the side of the road, he kicked it, and people said, "Shame on you! Why do you do that? Can't you see that the animal is crying?" And his reply, which of course was appalling, and he regretted it in later years, he said that, well, even if I hit a drum and it makes a sound, it doesn't mean that there is pain there. So this goat which I just kicked is only a more complex machine, but there is no mind there, there is no subjective experience there. And Descartes believed that, but he said we humans are different. In us humans, the soul from God enters into our body. He found even a place for it in the brain, and this is why we have subjective experience. And he was a kind of he was a kind of interactionist dualist, and even though he was a physicist, he probably believed that our soul is somehow interfering and even violating the laws of physics. And of course, we don't want to go there, which is ridiculous, at least not in terms of the difference between humans and animals. As you can see, I'm an animal lover myself. And of course, we know that the same question goes for the other for our other human being. I mean, if I deny consciousness to the animal, to my pet, or to my dog, then by the same reason I can deny consciousness to any other human being and claim that I'm the only person in the universe who has consciousness. And of course, that would be stupid and arrogant, and we don't want to go there. But it was Descartes, and we don't want to do that. Why do I think that we still have to embrace interactionist dualism and confess that there is some problem with physics? So just let's first go together. Let's go together along with the non-interactionist dualism and talk about zombies. Zombie is a nice exercise in the philosophical literature. Just as we said, we can imagine human beings which, by the very laws of physics, and remember, Darwin's evolutionary theory is a physical theory. They are organisms obeying causal laws, which are more complex, but they are the same as those of chemistry and physics. And so we could conceive of human beings which are zombies, which have no qualia at all. And by everything that we know about humans being explained by natural laws, we would confess that they would do exactly the same. And here the problem intensifies, and especially young people among you, students are most welcome to consult. Don't think about the zombies in the horror movies. These are different. The zombies of philosophers are zombies which behave just as you guys do, but they lack all subjective experience. So think about these examples. This girl is very hungry, and I don't believe that she eats it, but never mind. But she eats a hamburger. So she eats the hamburger because she is hungry and she enjoys eating the hamburger. Says the non-interactionist dualist or the materialist, she would do just the same as she lacked any qualia, any subjective experience of hunger and pleasure of food. And this couple who is making love, she would do exactly the same thing had they lacked qualia, just by the laws of physiology, evolution, and so on. Mother kissing baby, poor guy running for his life because there is an earthquake. All we know would proceed just the same have we lacked consciousness. This is what non-interactionist dualism and all theories which differ from interactionist dualism, this is what they all say. And I hope that you understand how ridiculous it is. But is there a way to refute it? In other words, can we think about any behavior, any human behavior, animal behavior, but for that matter, we can think about any behavior, that when we see it, we would say that kind of behavior would not occur has there not been subjective qualia. Okay, a person sees strawberry and say, what a nice strawberry, what a tasteful strawberry. You understand that whether there are qualia of red and tasty and so on, the thesis is that the common belief is that they would do just the same. Think about all other behaviors. Can we think about one behavior which differs from all these, in which have there been no qualia, that behavior would not occur? Shall I pause for a moment for you to think? Would you like to turn off this video and go and think about, observe people around you, and tell me whether you can think about any behavior which differs from this, in which would not exist has there been no qualia? Well, it is just behind your noses. One thing that has there been no inner life, no subjective experience, would not exist. What do you think? What on earth do you think we are doing right now? We are not eating, we are not making love, we are not kissing our babies or mothers, we are not escaping from home. What are we doing? We are talking about the mind-body problem. We are talking about the problem of qualia. We make conferences about it. We write books about it. We sometimes quarrel about it. So think again about Romeo and Juliet. Suppose there was an Israeli author who wrote a beautiful sequel to Romeo and Juliet in which they did not die. You might have heard of him, Ephraim Kishon, and they now live together happily. Actually, not happily. They hate one another and they keep quarreling. A beautiful play of Romeo and Juliet just being married for many years, completely fed up with one another. Okay, so think that they did not die, but they just, she dumped him. Okay, so Juliet dumped Romeo, and Romeo is now depressed, and then he goes to study philosophy, and he says, why is there depression in the world? Why is there misery in the world? And philosophers would explain to him, you know, this is a problem that also bothers us. There is a difference between the behavior of sadness, of being dumped, of being in despair, loving you, Juliet, which is no more with you, and the subjective experience of that. In this case, not like in the previous case in which Romeo was making love to Juliet or singing songs to her, thinking about the difference between the subjective experience, the qualia of loving Juliet and loving Juliet physically in the world, that is something that we would not do had we lacked consciousness, isn't it? So this is my bafflement argument. I say that the very fact that humans, few of them sometimes, say that there is something strange about their inner life, that they have qualia, and that these qualia seem to be distinct from their brain processes, that is one indication of qualia, of subjective experience, of consciousness interfering with our behavior, which means that actually it is present also in the earlier cases of eating hamburger, kissing a baby, and so on and so on. No, sorry, it's, yeah. So this is the bafflement argument. The fact that humans talk and write about qualia and about their being distinct from physical processes is an indication that something non-physical interferes with our bodily processes. So much the worse for physics. Yeah, we are in the clash, and this clash is unavoidable. I think that this is the lesser evil. This, what physics would regard as an anathema, in the present case, it is the lesser evil. Yes, some people knowledgeable about physics would say, Avshalom, your entire talk is based on determinism. But if we do not think about a deterministic world, then things may be different. Let me show that it is not the case. I'm a quantum physicist, and even if we assume that what goes on in our world cannot be predicted, still remember that conservation laws are held even in quantum physics, although in a different way. And let me say another thing. There were some great minds, Sir John Eccles, Nobel laureate in neurophysiology, and some great philosophers who argued that perhaps mind does not interfere with our brain, but somehow intervenes with it in the following way. Perhaps there are random processes, and all you have to do is to direct these processes to the right direction. This way, apparently, you did not violate conservation laws. You just interfered with something which is indeterministic to bring it to the result that you want. It will not work. There is a famous exercise in physics known as Maxwell's demon. It was an idea of James Clerk Maxwell. What happens if there is some tiny demon which can affect the random motions of molecules? Apparently, that seemed to violate the second law of thermodynamics. The solution to that problem by Szilard and Brillouin in the first 20th century showed that even for that, even for interfering with a completely random process so as to direct it to a certain desired outcome means energy exchanges between you and that system. I warmly recommend this volume, which is an anthology by Harvey Leff and Andrew Rex. They assembled together within one beautiful volume all the papers about Maxwell's demon, dating to Maxwell's letter, and then to Lord Kelvin, who tried to introduce some kind of vitalism, saying that life in principle violates physical laws, which of course is untenable today. Another guy, von Smoluchowski, who was a physicist, tried to solve it by applying to dualism, saying that mind, being so distinct from the physical world, can violate physical laws. Of course, this did not work, and nowadays it is the first maxim of information theory that any kind of information or order that you want to introduce into any system requires some energy, so it will not work. The clash with physics is there. One more thing, let us go even to a greater extreme. I've been privileged of knowing the team, the Paralab team in Princeton several years ago. You know that for many years there was a team in Princeton in the School of Engineering, and they studied parapsychology in the best scientific means that they had. And they existed for about 20 years, and then they had to close down when Professor Jan retired. I was there, and I have full appreciation to these people. I admire their courage, but I witnessed that sad moment when they had to close down, and they admitted that with all the experiments that they did with psychokinesis, telepathy, precognition, and so on, they were not capable of producing a repeatable experiment as required by scientific standards. So we cannot go there to such cases. We have to confine ourselves within mainstream science, and I argue again that I submit that my argument, the bafflement argument, holds. We are baffled by the problem of consciousness, by the existence of qualia, and that bafflement is an indication that something non-physical, these qualia, interferes with our behavior, with our conduct. Now, of course, people would not let me get away with it. My distinguished colleague, Dave Chalmers, wrote many years a beautiful book, which I urge you to go and read. It would be much more beautiful had Chalmers refrained from offering a solution to the mind-body problem. But this is the best exposition of the mind-body problem, all the earlier chapters of that. And he said that the problem is as sharp and as acute as it used to be in the days of the ancient Greeks. And all attempted solutions so far to it did not work or did not address it. And then, of course, he, in that book, he referred to my earlier argument. Elitzur argues directly from the existence of claims about consciousness to the conclusion that the laws of physics cannot be complete and that consciousness plays an active role in directing physical processes. But then I have argued, blah, 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 sorry, that interactionist dualism is of little help in avoiding the problem of explanatory irrelevance. And this is his only comment about my argument, which, of course, I do not accept. And let me choose my esteemed colleague Chalmers as my main adversary in this case, because he thinks that he knows a way to avoid the problem that I mentioned. He calls it the paradox of phenomenal judgment, and let's see what he claims. Oh, I should have showed that earlier. Okay, but here it goes. This is what Chalmers says. Now, you don't have to believe me. Go and read the book. This is what he says. I have consciousness. I wrote this book on consciousness. As you can see, you can read the book. I would have written exactly the same book have I lacked consciousness altogether. Can you understand how preposterous it is? And I have a lot of respect to David Chalmers, but can you understand what great despair can push a philosopher to make such a schizoid argument, which says, look, I'm talking about consciousness, like I'm doing now, and you're listening to me. But I am talking about consciousness not because I have consciousness. Even if I did not have consciousness, I would talk about consciousness. This is what he says. You are most welcome to go and to read it. And I think that I can show a refutation, direct proof, which I call the asymmetry proof, which says why Chalmers is wrong. So let's follow his argument, and may I be excused for slightly teasing him with playing on his name. So Chalmers is talking about a zombie, and he says, imagine that there is another planet in which there are zombies, and there is which is completely identical to ours, same evolution, same history, dinosaurs, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, and Chalmers and Elitzur and you guys, everything. There could be such a planet. But all of them are zombies. Animals, humans, all zombies, and they would do exactly the same. They lack qualia, but by the laws of physics, they would do the same. And then, of course, there should be a guy named Chalmers who writes exactly this book. So I'm arguing, let me put it as follows. A presumably consciousness human, we all presume that Chalmers is not a zombie and that he has consciousness, states that there is a difference between his percept, that is the brain process, and the corresponding quale. Okay, Chalmers gives in his book a nice recipe for a salad. I believe it is bean salad. So let's take this. You can try this recipe and cooking salad, preparing salad for yourself. But he says there is a quale of there is a quale of enjoying this salad, but there is also the process, the physical process of absorbing this salad and eating it, and they are distinct. So he says there is a difference between his P and Q, just as most philosophers do. Then he says, being mindful of physics, that a zombie duplicate of him, let's call that zombie charmless in order to distinguish between him and Chalmers. So this Chalmers is charmless, is conceivable, which is similar to him or identical to him in all aspects, save that he has only P without Q. Now, Chalmers asserts that by physical law, Chalmers must notice a difference between what he knows about the physical process underlying his percepts and the unmediated unmediated percept itself, which within Charmless presumably plays the role of Q. Let me explain what he says. Think about that Charmless. Why on earth should Charmless in his zombie planet write just the same book? Well, imagine this Charmless. You understand that if you meet Chalmers, don't mention this Charmless, because this is my own way of teasing him. But this is the name of the zombie. So why on earth would Chalmers write the same book like Chalmers if he has no qualia? Say Chalmers. Suppose he looks into at a bicycle, and then he looks at the bicycle, and there is a physical process of seeing the bicycle, but there is this immediate experience of seeing the bicycle, which has nothing to do, because this Charmless is not aware of what is going on within his brain. So then he thinks that there is a quale of seeing the bicycle in contrast to the process of seeing the bicycle, and this is why Charmless would write the same book. I think that you understand how preposterous it is. And then he says that this difference in the Charmless will produce the same behavioral consequence as the difference between the genuine P and Q that Chalmers has. Now, here is my suggestion. Go first to Chalmers and ask him, Dave, can you conceive of a zombie, a duplicate of you, identical to you but lacking Q? His answer, of course, you know, he wrote the book, it would be yes. Now here comes the decisive argument. Now go to Charmless, go to that planet, and ask Charmless, can you conceive of a duplicate of yours, let's call it harmless, who is identical to you but lacks Q? You understand that now here is a difference. His answer by number 3 would be no. There couldn't be such a thing. Unmediated percepts. Remember that when he sees the bicycle, there is the process and the unmediated percept, which is, let's say, the gestalt of seeing the bicycle. Unmediated percepts, regardless of what I know about them, must occur. In other words, Chalmers can conceive of a charmless, but Charmless cannot conceive of a harmless. The two kinds of bafflement associated with number 1 and number 3 are different. Ergo, The physical explanation for 3 does not hold for 1 QED. I would very much welcome you to read this asymmetry proof, see if there is any loophole in it. I think that it is very rigorous. I made it very concise and very short. You're most welcome, of course, to read Chalmers, to read his later papers of his. And I'll make sure that we're in the same place where you can find this video, there will be the paper which I wrote, so you can consult also the paper. Let me say, of course, we are now in a problem. If we opt for interactionist dualism, which is an anathema for the physicist, and we go into clash with conservation laws, but at least there is one consolation. First of all, we understand something about evolution. We understand something about ourselves. Think about all these animals. They do not write books about consciousness, not that I know. They do not make conferences. There are no giraffe philosophers or elephant philosophers who keep being baffled by their consciousness. But the behavior of us humans, being baffled by it, means that if there is such an ingredient, that ingredient in our behavior exists also in the cases which are non-reflexive. Mother kissing son, girl eating hamburger, elephant, lion, zebra doing whatever they're doing. In other words, because of this additional ingredient which determines our behavior, perhaps the rabbit runs from the fox slightly faster. Yes, I know, it clashes with conservation laws. All right, but perhaps that is why this miracle of qualia exists. Perhaps when the giraffe is thirsty, it gives more effort to finding water, and so on and so on. Then we can understand that if consciousness exists and goes down to the level of animals and even small organisms, and as panpsychists may say, even in inanimate matter in some very profound way, that could be a way to solving the mystery in the future. This is the scheme of my argument, which you are most welcome to follow, and I'll make sure that it is also available for you as a document in itself, how I come to dualism. And that's about it. I believe I rest my case. I would very much love to hear your comments, and let us end with these two sages. It was the physiologist Émile de Bouhey-Riemann who said many, many years ago, ignoramus et ignorabimus, the problem of qualia, the miracle of qualia, and he was a reductionist, one of the most ardent reductionists in the history of science. He believed that everything, all biology should be reduced to chemistry and then to physics, but when he came to the problem of consciousness, he said, we do not know and we will not know. And there was another German great mind, David Hilbert, who severely opposed this specific statement and said, we must know and we will know. Let us hope that this is indeed the case. Thank you very much for listening to me. All the best.